Welcome to the Executive Alliance podcast. I'm Rebecca Snyder, Executive Director of Executive Alliance. In each episode, alternating hosts Christine Walsh and myself will sit down with accomplished women leaders in Maryland to explore the journeys that shaped them, the challenges they overcame, and the insights they've gained along the way. We'll also tackle the issues that influence women's leadership today, from opportunities for growth and advancement to the systems and barriers that can stand in our way. Through authentic conversations and shared experiences, we're building a community where women learn from one another, support one another, and move forward together. We're glad you're here. Welcome, everyone. I am delighted to have Julie East in the studio today for our podcast. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you.
So you are an executive coach, a leadership consultant, and a former HR exec. And I think part of what I admire so much about your leadership style is the way that you are able to sort of bring the disparate pieces of people together and really ensure that they reach their full potential. So as a leadership style, I think that's so important. You've worked for large organizations like Amazon and the Gap and the Atlas Restaurant Group, and now you have your own coaching and consulting business that supports
Yes.
executives, teams, and fractional HR. And let's not forget, you're also the co-chair of our mentoring program.
That's right. One of my favorite jobs.
Yes, it's a great one. So, well, let's get started with all that sort of disparate experience. Tell me how you became the leader you are today. Was there some specific experiences or mentors along your journey that you can point to say, yes, that was a turning point for me?
Yes, absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I remember very distinctly when mentorship became a really important part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to do back when I was probably mid-career with Gap Inc., working in the employee relations department and serving like thousands and thousands of employees. And I was mentoring a newer HR generalist in New York City, and she was rough around the edges as they could come. Being in HR, that was not the most sought after skill, I guess you could say, but she definitely, was able to move things forward in her store. And she had sought me out as a mentor, and we worked very well together. And it wasn't maybe 5 years later that our paths crossed again. And this time she actually, and she had done very well in her career, and she had been promoted to a senior director role. And at that time I was a director, and she had an opening in her department, and I decided that I would love to work with her again. And so our roles switched, and she became my boss, but she also became my mentor. And I was at a place in my career where I wasn't quite sure, is HR still my thing? And is this really where I want to be? And she did such a wonderful job of challenging me, asking me, the tough questions about where I really saw myself. She helped me to regain my confidence. And that whole experience really showed me the value and the importance of mentoring. And fast forward many years later now, as a certified executive coach, I definitely draw into some of those things that I learned from her as my, I would call her my executive coach or my mentor at the time. And so it's about helping to accept people where they are, but also caring enough about them not to keep them stuck where they are. So that has informed a lot of who I am as a leader today.
Mm-hmm. And I love that your roles kind of reversed. And I think that's so important in the mentoring relationship that, and that's something we harp on at Executive Alliance, that everyone has something to give and everyone has something to receive.
Absolutely.
And, the meeting, actually, I want to dive in a little bit more to the meeting people where they are, because that is not as easy as it trips off the tongue so easily. Like, we'll meet you where you are. But that can be really difficult. And in that example that you shared, when your mentor was a store manager, she was a little rough around the edges, maybe a little bit more forthright. So, like, meeting her where she was probably wasn't easy. So
Mhm,
how do
mhm.
you sort of adroitly do that and keep the respect of everyone involved?
Right. Well, a large part of it has to do with thinking about impact and pointing out impact of someone else's skill set. And is that really where they want to be going? Is that really the impact that they want to have? And in coaching, we hold the mirror up, right? So
Mhm.
that is a big part of being able to discuss, here's what I'm observing, here's what I'm seeing, what are you seeing? And are those things that you're doing getting you what you really want? And,
Mm.
sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes the answer is no. And that opens the door wide open for further exploration around what is it that you really want to do, and what sort of behaviors do you think might help to shift you to be able to get more of what you really want out of relationships, out of leadership, etc.
Well, and I think executive coaching and really this whole piece is not necessarily about someone's work performance, but it's about how they're integrating their lives and their work lives into their home
Yes.
life and back and forth
That's
as
right,
you kind of
that's right.
you appear wherever you are in all of your glorious mess.
That's
Um,
true.
and so like when and I want to ask about that self-awareness piece because when someone's
Mhm.
holding up that mirror, it's not always you're seeing your blind spots sometimes, and I think that's in your current role, in your coaching role, that's part of your job to really show that up. How do you deal when someone doesn't wanna see those blind spots? Like
Mhm. It's a great question. Well, honestly, sometimes what it takes is doing what we call a 360 evaluation,
mm,
right? Where, you think about, if a leader is here in the organization, there's people above them, people beside them as their peers, people below them as their direct reports, other stakeholders around that circle, and going out and getting the data to help the person who's being coached understand how they are perceived and what sort of results they're getting can be really instrumental in shifting somebody's mindset to be more open to feedback and to realize, oh, you know, I didn't realize when I do this, this is how I'm perceived, or I didn't realize that behavior actually causes people to see me this way or causes people to be resistant to me, when in fact what I'm really trying to do is recruit them to be on my team and share a common vision. So that is, one of the many, the 360 tool is one of the many and probably one of my favorite ways of actually getting that feedback. And I can do that with an assessment, a online assessment, but actually my favorite way to do it is through what we call a verbal 360.
mm,
And that is where the client actually picks, again, people representative of that 360. And then I go and have a 20-minute conversation. I ask them, what is something that this leader does really well? What's one thing that if they were to do differently would make a big impact on their overall effectiveness?
mm.
And then what other advice do you have for this leader? And that question, the other advice, is often where the floodgate opens a little bit. And I really start to get some great data for the client. My job then is to, uh, put all of that data together in a way that's confidential. It protects the anonymity of those who've given feedback, and present it to the client in a way that is digestible and also points them towards a goal setting, right?
Mhm.
So, what do we want to take away? What is the thing that we want to work on from this experience?
I love how you're using it as data as opposed to because it can feel very personal,
Yes.
when you're, um, thinking about your leadership journey or how you're showing up in different spaces. It's you, it's very fraught, like,
Hmm.
it can feel very vulnerable,
Hmm.
and I think by pulling that back and distancing a little bit and talking it about behaviors and
Yes.
impact and roles as opposed to, "Rebecca really needs to do blah, blah, blah,"
Hmm.
which feels much
Or,
more
or
invasive.
even worse, Rebecca is fill in the blank,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Very judgy, very, judgment oriented, feeling very evaluative.
Mhm.
When instead, like you said, it really is about behavior, and does that behavior drive the outcome that the person is looking for?
Yeah. And so I feel like that's such a systems approach.
Mhm.
Before we get into systems approach, just to close the thought on you are not, like you're not one thing. When you talk about behaviors, I think that does open it up to say you can contain multitudes.
Mhm.
You
That's
can
right.
behave really empathetically or really judgmentally or whatever the case might be
Mhm.
and still not feel like, oh, you are blankety blank.
That's right.
Um, and
Yeah.
so that's, I think just as we all go through our journeys to remember that
Mhm.
it's behaviors and outcomes and goals.
That's right. And where that mindset intersects on this diagonal is the whole concept of emotional intelligence.
Mm,
And the first two areas that we look at in emotional intelligence, one is self awareness. And is the person even aware of when they're behaving a certain way? And then the second component is once they're aware, are they able to make a definitive decision in the moment as to whether or not they're going to follow through with an impulse that they have, right? So self control is what that's called. And it is a lot about impulse control and remembering, gosh, if I raise my voice or develop a tone that is condescending, am I keeping this person engaged or am I putting that person into, their brain into a threat mode where they're going to lose their ability to fully engage with me because they're worried about protecting themselves. So
mm.
it's very interesting. There's a lot of psychology that goes into it. I try not to over psychologize it because it can be that very quickly, right? But that whole notion of self-awareness and self-control is critical as foundation to this idea around behaviors.
And I think actually as I talk more and more with women leaders, it's usually about self-control, regulating your own impulses.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the crucial components of being a successful leader is like holding space for everyone else to freak out. Like you can't freak
Yes.
out
Right, right.
because everyone else around you is freaking out. And
Yes.
so, I, tell me, does that resonate with you? Is
Oh,
that
yes. I call that being the adult in the room. So when you get to a certain place in your leadership trajectory, no more are you allowed the freedom to freak out yourself when you have X number of people who are depending on you. And you may do that behind closed doors or with your trusted confidant or with your coach, but you have, you carry a mantle, if you will, of leadership that really requires, in order for things to go, as well as they possibly can, that requires that leader to stay present, allowing people to vent or freak out or whatever you want to call it, but not jumping into that fray and being able to listen non-evaluatively so that people feel safe and
Mhm.
people will get through that emotional reaction much quicker if they have a safe place to be able to express themselves and to move on from that point.
That makes a lot of sense. And so, but when you're in the middle of like, you're the leader, you try to
Hmm.
hold your mantle tight and protect everyone around you. What are your strategies um, for self-regulation?
For self-regulation.
Yeah. Like, so
So we
like,
said
how do
we
you
had a
not
little bit of
freak
a
out?
blip there. Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Self-regulation. So uh, that is rooted in self-awareness, right? So when I'm working with a client who struggles to fully understand how they're feeling in any given moment. And that sounds really weird when I say that. Like, how do you mean not knowing how I feel in any given moment? But I myself have been there before. I have been a leader and not understood what was happening with my mind and my body and why I started sweating or whatever it might be. And what is that showing me? Right. So that is a part of self awareness is to pay attention to what's going on with your breath, with your body, with, whether it's becoming fidgety or sweaty or any number of different uh, reactions that can happen when the stress starts to rise.
Mhm.
So that is self awareness. That is, okay, what is my body telling me right now? Why am I feeling this way? So by first, firstly, assigning a client to really focus on, say, for a couple of week period, those reactions and
Mm,
writing down, journaling about it. And that some people don't like to journal. They just want to, remember it. That's fine. Put it in your phone, whatever.
mhm,
But it's a great technique for people to really start to highlight, ah, that's why I'm feeling why I am. That's the self awareness that I need in order to be able to then also put my attention not just on myself, but the other people around me. And
mhm,
when I can jump from me to others, others, then I can regulate myself in a way that's going to get me that outcome that I want, as opposed to just reacting, perhaps maybe how I've habitually done my entire life.
mhm. I think when we're talking about that shift from me to others,
Mm-hmm.
that's where it goes from sort of from an individual to kind of an organizational mindset, and
Mm-hmm.
you've worked in some really big spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So, how how do leaders really influence that organizational culture? Because, like you're one person
Right.
and you're not touching all the people in an organization. But
Mm-hmm.
tell me a little bit about your kind of philosophy or thought about how leaders influence the organizational culture.
Right. Well, and you had mentioned something even before we started our recording today about how, culture starts at the very top of the organization. And
Mhm,
I agree with that very strongly. Because if I am an employee, a mid-level employee, or even a higher level employee, I'm always looking at that person above to see how are they going to react? How are they going to handle this? What sort of outcome is going to be as a result of this stress that maybe they're receiving from the CEO or the president of the organization. So there's several components that go into that. One is leaders need to be trained on how to communicate vision and how to communicate when times are tough. And sometimes that involves even someone who's an expert in communication, corporate communication, providing talking points so that leaders are on the same page. They're saying the same message, right? If you
mm,
talk to this person in this other area of the company, they will have heard the same message from their senior leader delivered in a way that is, empathetic, but also objective. So I think that's a really important part. And that's where, in my experience, because I come at the work from an HR standpoint, but also as a coaching standpoint, where the two, I think, intersect really nicely.
mhm,
Being in HR all of these years, I've had such great exposure to really good communication teams because I was often a part of that. I was often in the know earlier than other people. So the HR's teams support those higher level leaders in making sure that the messaging that they're delivering is in alignment with what the company would have, or with, in a way that is done so that employees can digest it, as opposed to, God forbid, a leader saying, this is what they're telling me I have to say, right? Which
that
just,
always feels bad.
it's very bad when that happens. So, so I think what I would say, again, for any of the listeners who are high level leaders, thinking about how do you rely on your HR partner? And are you looking to them to give you feedback? Are you looking for their insights into how to communicate? How did I communicate? So that the message is consistent, it's aligned, and employees can, they may not like it, but at least they're being communicated with, and the company is not trying to hide anything.
Mhm. It feels like that self-awareness is so critical because really in that instance, like the HR department is sort of reflectively listening or pushing back uh,
Hmm.
information to the leader to say this is what you might want to anticipate the
Yes.
reactions
Yeah.
of frontline staff or mid-level staff, because I think sometimes leaders can get isolated.
Hmm.
So
Oh,
over and above
yes.
talking to your HR department,
Hmm.
how, do you have suggestions or ways that leaders can kind of step out of that bubble?
Well, it is, you know, I guess I would say being an open book to different people's perspectives. HR is only one perspective in a multitude of data points that a leader can pay attention to. But HR, in most cases, depending on the person and their background, an HR partner comes into that setting already having a big focus on making sure the employees, the rank and file, are uh, treated with respect,
Mm-hmm.
given the right level of information, especially when times are difficult and maybe there are layoffs going on. I know there's been so many companies that have experienced that over the past couple of years. I think HR has a special place at that table, but that's not the only place, right? It can also be that high level leaders, direct reports, finding out from them. So tell me, what did you hear from your team? Did they feel that the communication was adequate for them to know what's really going on, or at least to feel as though they've been given the right level of information? There may be more information that sometimes can't be shared.
Right.
So, it's a mixture of different data points that leader can seek out. And I found that along with emotional intelligence, one of the most, um, what separates, I think, a good leader from a great leader is a leader who is constantly asking for feedback. And
Mm.
that is not easy to do, right? Because sometimes it's an ego arrow right into your heart when you
Sure.
hear something that you really didn't want to hear. But the more a leader gets used to asking for feedback and asking from a variety of places, they kind of sort of build that true humility around, okay, no one's always going to agree with me, but I can learn from this. I can grow from this. And ideally, that leader, a great leader, never stops growing. They're
Mhm.
always interested to hear, what else can I do? What could I do differently? What could I do better? What should I stop doing? There
That
is
sounds very
a
much like the 360 questions that you're
exactly.
asking. So,
Yes.
like,
Yes.
great leaders kind of are constantly doing their own version of a 360
hmm
evaluation. Is that one
In
way
a
to think of
way,
it?
and I was going to say, you may have heard of this before. It's been around for a long time, but there's a feedback model called start, stop, continue.
Hmm.
And that simply, where if I was asking you, Rebecca, for feedback on my performance, in a mentor session, I might say, I want to use the start, stop, continue. I'd like you to tell me, what should I start doing that I didn't do?
Mm-hmm.
What should I stop doing that you think was not effective? And then what should I continue doing that was effective, right? So start, stop, continue. And it's a really robust way to get feedback. And sort of depersonalizes it to a point so
Sure.
that the leader may be less challenged to receive the feedback, but also the person who's being asked for feedback will be less maybe shy to share their true point of view.
When it's three things, so you can think of three things, three
Exactly. Yeah.
aspects. You don't go off on tangents,
hmm
and that feels very effective.
Yes.
Um, so I wanted to go on to managing versus coaching because you've
Mm.
spent a lot of your career suggesting management styles, managing other people,
hmm
and now you're coaching
hmm
on the regular. So were there seismic shifts in doing that? I feel like you must have always had sort of a coaching approach in your management style. But is
Yeah,
that
well,
true? Is that just my perception?
it's so funny that you asked that. So I thought I always had a coaching approach in my leadership style. And it turns out when I went through my coaching school to become a certified executive coach, and I learned what true coaching is, I realized that I had not been truly coaching. I had simply been telling people what to do with a smile on my face.
Oh, well, at least it
Yeah.
felt good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what what I learned, and this was so eye-opening at the time, and now it's second nature, but at the time I learned that coaching was really asking a series of open-ended questions to help a person solve their own problem rather than me giving them advice or direction on how to solve it. And there's so many benefits to asking open-ended questions because, like, for example, the person who is being asked those questions will have much more ownership over the solution if they come up with a solution themselves, as opposed to being told, well, you should do this, right?
Mhm.
It also enables them much more creativity on not only what they need to do to solve the problem, but how they're going to get there. And again, the coach's job can be to sit and listen and ask questions such as, so what have you thought about so far? What else comes to mind when you think about that problem? And staying with that, saying, okay, and what else? What else can you think of? And maybe
Mhm.
asking that question a few different times. It feels kind of awkward when you're doing it, when you're coaching, but to the person who's receiving those questions, it can be very freeing and really help them to tap into creative parts of the brain that they had ideas they hadn't even come up with before.
Mhm.
And once a person has decided, oh, I think I'm going to do this, and now the coach shifts to a more detail oriented coaching that can be questions like, so what items do you think need to be on your game plan to get this done? By when do you think is reasonable to have this done? Who else do you need to access a resource to help you? And then what do you need from me to help you? Right.
Mhm.
So that what I reviewed just now is actually something that a colleague of mine and we created a coaching course
Mm.
for leaders, for managers, to help them adopt a more of a coaching style because there are so many benefits to doing it that way.
Well, tell me a little bit. I do want to know more about the course because I remember when you first launched it, and it occurs to me that I don't know if you're still doing it.
Yes,
So
we are.
is it still online or how does it work?
Yep.
Tell
So
Let's hype
we
it.
thought, yeah, we thought about doing it like recording ourselves and putting it on an LMS platform, but we find that there is so much rich discussion just going through the course live, and so we do a lot of smaller group conversations and practices. So we've decided to keep it as is. We actually do have a course coming up in the fall. We do it probably twice a year now, I would say,
Mhm.
but it's people walk away like their mindset has been really shifted from, I thought I was a great leader, but now this is just another set of tools that I can add into my toolbox that help me be even more well rounded. So I don't just have to be giving advice, giving direction, but I can also use these open ended questions to help my individual direct reports or whoever that might be solve the problem on their own.
Mhm. Well, and that brings me to sort of the next thing that strikes me is like, what do you think you would have brought? How would your leadership journey be different if you had been coaching as a manager as
Yeah.
opposed to smilingly giving advice as a
Yes.
manager?
Well, and in my case, I had two groups of constituents, one being my own direct reports. And I think that I would have, had started that earlier, I would have been able to develop them more quickly because,
Mm.
again, when they're creating their own solutions, they're also developing, which is really cool. But as an HR partner, I also had not, throughout my career, I'd been delivering that advice with a smile on my face. I would have also been able to develop the partners that I worked with in operations over the years to solve their problems a little bit more quickly and also to not be quite so heavily reliant on HR to tell them
Mhm.
how to do things, to tell them how to deal with a performance problem or tell them how to, deal with a morale problem in their location.
Because it feels like in the moment, that sort of, coaching aspect of, "We're gonna talk through this, we're going to ask these open-ended questions," it feels like it takes so much time.
Yes, yes.
And so but in the long run, like, when you look with the long range view, you're developing people so they don't need you as much. But how do
Mhm.
you kinda deal with that push-pull of like, "Oh, right now I don't have the
Right,
time for a
exactly.
2-hour conversation."
So so how do you think you do that? You're absolutely right. There are times when it is not appropriate, 100%. And one one of the times that I've been able to identify is if there's only one right answer, then I'm just going to tell you what you need to
Mm.
know, right?
Mhm.
Also, if you tell me I don't want to be coached right now, I just need you to tell me the answer. Then I'm going to do what you need me to do because otherwise it's going to be an exercise in frustration for both of us.
I remember, years ago, I used to do a lot of, mediation in the inclusive model, which is a
Uh huh.
lot of
Yeah.
open-ended questions,
Absolutely.
building a
Yeah.
framework. And I vividly remember my daughter being like, Mom, don't mediate me right now. I just want to, I just want to tell you this, or I just want to get an answer. And
That's
you're right. Like
hilarious.
sometimes always know your audience and what
That's
the
right.
end role is. So
That sounds like my husband. He's like always telling me, take your HR hat off. I'm like, I can't. It's stuck.
it's right there. It's all the time. But and also I was talking to Diana Emerson of Emerge, who we had on the show last week,
Uh-huh.
and a lot of what she was talking about was the idea that you're here for a short period of time and you're developing either the person or the organization so they can be sustainable and they can move forward without you. And
Yes.
so that sort of feels very
Yes.
similar.
It is, definitely. It is, and that's also the same mindset that I bring to my fractional HR roles. I have in addition to coaching, I also join executive teams on a part-time basis when either they can't afford a full-time CHRO or they just need some people's strategy. And the idea is not to make myself indispensable, right? But to over time really teach them and help them to create the culture on their own that they want and to execute on people's strategies that help their staff to become engaged and remain engaged.
Right. Well, and so I want to head to that idea of HR at the strategy table
Hmm.
because it is. I think sometimes people look at the HR function as someone who's always saying no, or
Oh,
like,
yes.
what about this pesky rule that we have to comply with,
Yes.
like almost as a barrier. So talk to me, because that must also pain you
It
you
does
to.
pain me greatly,
So
actually.
so tell me about HR as part of a strategy and why it
Hmm.
should be included instead of kind of swept aside.
Yeah. Well, and I would first of all say recently I had this example of a client had a HR person who was constantly telling them no. And I actually saw this in playing out one day and she was like, "No, you can't do that." So I pulled the owner aside and said, "Listen, this is a well-meaning HR person who just doesn't understand how to communicate. HR should never be telling you no. HR should be laying out the business case, right? For the risk in some cases, or compliance risk, legal risk, whatever it might be. But the business owner should really be deciding if they're going to do something or not. They're the
Mm,
ones who have to take on the risk. They're the ones who would have to pay for the risk if it were to come to a legal situation and they were to get sued or need a settlement. So I try really hard to make sure when I'm working with my clients that I don't ever say, no, you can't do that. Let's just talk about what the potential outcomes could be.
I like that. And so is that when you're at the table with in that C-suite kind of
Hmm.
conversation and you're talking about long range strategy, are there other pieces of HR that normally are discounted that you like to bring to the table?
Um, I would say there are parts of HR that are heavily leaned into that I think sometimes take up too much space. Sometimes I think there is such a focus on the administration and the compliance piece that that's the only thing that executive leaders think HR can do.
Mhm,
And so part of what I do is educate around what a people strategy could look like. And
mhm,
it is all about being in service to the business. To me, I don't want to do HR for the sake of HR. I want to
right.
do HR for the sake of growing the business and practicing HR in a way that actually helps that business to increase revenue. And so we know there's so many studies. I can't quote any of them right now, but so many studies about how employees who feel that they have a career path, that they're being developed, that their employer is loyal to them, all of those things create an employee who want to really give what we refer to as that discretionary effort, right? That's an
Mm,
older term that comes from what I call the olden days of when we talked about engagement surveys. engagement surveys can measure the discretionary effort that an employee will give based on how they score their feelings about the organization and about working there. So the more the company gives to the employee, the more the employee, in 9 times out of 10, will give to the employer. There's always going to be a few bad actors that, we need to work with, try to help improve, or else exit them from the organization. But those remaining 90%, if you have them fully engaged, giving that discretionary effort, what does that do for your business? It does
Mhm.
great things, right? It really can make a huge, and um, being out of the retail environment, there was a statement that I had heard a long time ago that said the highest degree of your customer engagement will be equal to the lowest engaged employee that you have. So if you think
So
about
interesting.
if you think about the lowest engaged employee that you have, that's generally about as good as it's going to get in terms of your customer engagement. So it
Mhm.
behooves, especially organizations that have their employees customer facing, it really behooves them to think about this whole idea of engagement and empowerment and giving to the employee so that they will give back to you.
So I wanted just to unpack what discretionary engagement really means,
Oh,
because
yeah.
that's
Mhm.
not that's not like, oh, I'm going to work over my 40, or I'm going to do what does that truly mean for
Yeah.
in this context?
Well, in some cases, it might be I'm going to work extra hours to get my work done. Especially if we think about someone who is paid a salary, right? They're paid to do
Right.
a job. They're not clocking in and out every day. So discretionary effort may mean I am working extra, coming in earlier, leaving a little bit later to be able to get my work done because I know by doing so, it's going to move whatever process along quicker. But it could also be, um, extra creativity, doing extra research to really make sure the product that I'm delivering, whether it's to the customer or to the organization, is top notch, right? It's
Mhm.
truly exhibiting what we would consider to be excellence. So, at that point of discretionary effort is also the idea of work life balance, right? So we
Right.
can't ignore the other side of that coin, which is we don't want our people working so much that they're burning out. And so it's trying to message around we really love that discretionary effort, but we also don't want you working so much that you neglect your family or you neglect your health.
Well, and when the company is giving back and things that they can do for a staffer, it's
Yes,
not all, it's not always money. It could be, you
right.
know what, we are hiring additional people so that you don't have to work all those hours, or
Exactly.
what other things do you find, especially as the workforce is changing?
Hmm.
It feels like what individuals want from their companies, especially in the context of all the contraction that's gone on with companies
Yes.
and, like, the fear around AI coming to take jobs.
Hmm.
In your experience, what does the workforce want from companies? And I
Hmm.
know that's like the workforce is not a monolith, but what are you seeing in
Right.
your practice?
Yes. Well, one of the things that is really interesting as people, in my age group grow older, they find themselves caught between still raising a family and now dealing with their aging parents.
Mhm.
So one of the amazing benefits, and when we think of benefits, we think of medical and dental and all of that, but truly a great benefit is some type of connection to a platform or a group of therapists who can help with those types of life transitions. How do I care for my aging parent? What sort of resources do I need to help them make sure that they're safe so that I can work and not
Mhm.
feel that anxiety the same way I might have when my kids were toddlers, right?
Right.
But at the same time, I still have to be going to high school soccer games or whatever it might be. So it's just a lot. And that's one example. Another example that's sort of I would put in a different vein is unlimited PTO. That
Mhm.
was really popular a few years ago, but what we found is that it's not as great as what we thought because people feel guilty when they take PTO when it's in an unlimited situation, whereas when there's a bank of PTO that then they know they can go up to a certain,
Yeah,
number
they
of
feel like they
hours
can
in a
take it.
year. Yeah,
If it's
exactly.
if it's unlimited, I think you constantly have to be looking at the people around you to be like, am I in line with what everybody's
Yes,
taking?
exactly,
That feels very
exactly.
stressful to me.
It is, yeah. So I've actually advised a few clients to kind of back away from that idea and still, they can be generous with their PTO. They can give 5 weeks, 6 weeks, a year. And then people know, okay, I have up to here that I can actually take, and then they can go and take it and not worry about feeling like, oh gosh, I'm taking advantage of a situation. I'm going to be
Mhm.
judged for that.
Yeah. Okay, that makes perfect sense. I wanted to, because you do so much with the Executive Alliance mentoring
Hmm.
program. I first and I want to talk about sort of what you see for the mentoring program and the effect of it, but I wanted to just loop back because you were talking about um your mentoring relationship with a coworker and
Hmm.
supervisor and sort of your coaching approach. And I'm just curious, like, what do you see as the differences? Because they seem a little interconnected, coach and mentor.
Yes, right.
But where do you see them intersecting? Where are they apart?
Yeah, great question, actually. And interestingly enough, in coaching school, right, that we go to, we look at the spectrum of mentoring, coaching, therapy, and
Oh,
how they're all on a spectrum, but they're all
mhm,
different. So mentoring is characterized by I'm more experienced than you. I'm going to share my specific examples of where I did this or that that will help you. Doesn't mean you do exactly what I do, but it does give the person who's being mentored an idea of who's gone before them and what sort of trail was blazed. And sometimes mentoring also involves giving advice, right? Well,
mhm.
maybe you should try this, maybe you should try that. And I know in our effective mentoring or in our
Effective impact
yes,
mentoring
thank you,
program.
effective impact mentoring
It's a lot of
program,
words.
we encourage that all of those types of discussions because it can really benefit the mentees in the program. They have this wonderful one-on-one relationship that they build throughout the 9-month program, but then they also come to monthly sessions, monthly content sessions. So they're getting exposure to maybe things that they've never thought about before, things that they've only heard about but didn't really know how to do. As an example, negotiating a salary, right?
Mhm,
Negotiating you for what you're worth. That session, I find that to be so impactful because a lot of women who are in their early to mid career who have that leadership trajectory haven't really thought about that before.
mhm.
So anyway, so fast forwarding to coaching, we already sort of talked about coaching being less about telling and less about the coach sharing their story, instead really drawing out the story of the person, the client, the person who's being coached, and then helping them by holding up the mirror, doing that active listening, and then asking those open ended questions. Therapy, on the other side of coaching, is more about going back and exploring things that happened long ago that now shape the person into who they are today and changing thought patterns, right? And we do this a little bit in coaching, but in therapy, there are many therapeutic approaches to being able to get at um, some of the dysfunction that may
Mhm.
exist in someone's mind, perhaps how they were treated by their father, how that affects their ability to work with men in authority today, right? That's a
Mhm.
really big issue. So that would be sort of how I would define the differences between mentoring and coaching and then therapy.
That was extraordinarily helpful to see that arc.
Yeah,
So
good.
thank you for sharing that.
Yes, absolutely.
And so as we wind down, and I could
Uh-huh.
talk to you for so long, but time is what we have. Um, I wanted to know who you admire most as a leader. Do you have
Mm,
any standout leaders that you're like,
yeah.
yes?
Yes. So I have to say, I am a big fan of Brene Brown.
Mhm,
And the reason is that she has truly shown how humility, authenticity, being completely open helps people to follow that person, right? It's not about me knowing it all.
mhm,
It's about me not knowing it all and selectively sharing, not becoming a bleeding heart open book where it's just nauseating, but selectively sharing about my vulnerabilities so that people feel safe. Because the bottom line is, if I'm a leader who is in command and control, the people around me, their brains are going to go into threat mode. And we haven't really talked about brain science, but I'm also a big brain science fan. But I know that brains will go into threat mode. And what happens physically is we stop breathing and not enough
Mm.
oxygen gets to our brain. And then we really can't respond. So it's like if you've ever had that experience of someone yelling at you and you just like, right, you
For
just feel
sure.
like you're
Right.
like deer in a headlight, right? That's what's happening. So a strong leader understands that and can create a safe environment for individuals to bring to the table their full creativity, their full ideas. And that I think is just, it's really awesome when that can happen.
Mm, I love that. Well, that's what a great ending spot. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on your leadership
Mhm.
journey. We'll have to have you back for brain science at some
Absolutely.
point. That would be fun. And it was great to talk to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. It was really wonderful being with you today.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Executive Alliance podcast. We hope today's conversation inspired you, challenged you, and reminded you that leadership is a journey best traveled together. Executive Alliance is a catalyst for women leaders in Maryland. We believe in advancing women's representation at the highest levels of leadership in business, civic organizations, and government. To learn more about our programs, events, and membership opportunities, visit executivealliance.org. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with a colleague, and leave a review. It helps us continue to amplify the voices, experiences, and impact of women leaders. Until next time, remember that every woman has something to teach and something to learn, something to offer and something to receive. When we recognize the value and potential in one another, we become stronger leaders, stronger organizations, and a stronger community. Keep reaching forward, reaching back, and bringing more women into the light.